Steady. And we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. We have a new Marvel show, Loki, continuing our magical summer of nerddom, where we get to review things weekly, and now doing 2 of these a week because we got Bad Batch as well. With me are the amazing Gabby Martin, all the way from Connecticut, that magical place, and Mark Zaid, off in Washington, D.C., where the sun rises and sets on the entire country. Mark, how you doing?
I am doing very well. Things are going well in D.C. Although we're a little overwhelmed with cicadas at the moment, every few million of them, but they are starting to die off faster than all the, I don't even remember what they're called about in Infinity Wars, whatever those nasty creatures are that was brought to the planet, and how easy they died, or at least how quickly they died, I suppose.
Kind of like was it Centauri? Yeah.
Chitauri?
Or Chitauri. Yes.
I am much more up on my Marvel facts than I am my Star Wars facts, so I am ready to be on with the Marvel trivia.
Well done. I actually have a Trivial Pursuit, Trivial Pursuit game of Marvel trivia. So maybe we can actually do this sort of thing in person sometime. Glorious. Speaking of glorious, Gabby, what'd you think of the first episode of Loki?
I was after WandaVision, I was a little let down by Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so I was kind of so on expectations for the next Marvel show. But I gotta say, I think this is going to be better than WandaVision. I really do. So I'm really excited.
Sounds like
the bureaucracy of it. I love it. I love it. I could watch episode after episode of just mindless paperwork.
You were destined to go to law school. It sounds like you listened to Mark and I rant about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, feeling emotionally let down and betrayed. Should pass it. You should be able to pass a civics class if you write a Captain America story.
Yeah. And of course the kind of fallout and interviews afterwards, where it didn't seem like the writers had watched their own show, talking about how people should have been in love with U.S. Agent, and I was just like, are we watching the same show? Wasn't what I got from it. So
it's like, were things edited? Did he have a different arc that we missed because of editing? So
yeah. I kind of think it's a Mandela effect thing. We watch 2 different shows, so there is some Falcon and the Winter Soldier show out there that is much different. So hopefully it will be uncovered soon.
Probably in a different timeline, which raises the specter of what Loki is about. Despite the fact that this is, the TVA for the Temporal Variance Authority, and I hope I got that right. This actually is pretty rich in legal issues. And, before we dive into it, Mark, since you and I survived together the trauma of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, wanting to love it, but feeling neglected and turned away. How'd you feel about episode 1 of Loki?
Yeah, as I was sitting watching it, I kept actually thinking, oh man, there's no legal issues here, because it's so much science fiction and off Earth that I'm like, I don't think I'm going to have anything to discuss, which at the same time meant I kind of enjoyed it a little bit more, because I didn't have to intellectually think it through and have a moment of, oh, come on, that's just blatantly so wrong. And any, high school civics student should have realized that's not how that works. So I enjoy all the Marvel segments just because it's at least a continuation. But it was definitely a strange episode. I think I probably would have thought it even stranger if it had preceded WandaVision. But because that was just so, what the heck are they doing? I don't get this. This one seemed normal. I mean, the storyline was like, okay, I don't know any of this storyline, and we'll talk about DB Cooper because that was just the weirdest random insert, unless there's some background that I'm not aware of. But I actually have right behind me like a full run of Thor comics that I purchased in a Thor collection, and I got lots of Thor items selling on eBay. By the way, if anybody wants them, they're all here. Right? There's a Thor van and a Thor Journey into Mystery statue. So I got a whole bunch of stuff here that I bought as a collection. That's all for sale. But I like the actor who plays Loki, whatever the heck his name is again, and I think he does a good job as it. And again, this was a silly storyline. The interactions of the other characters, and what's his name, who's playing the main
Owen Wilson.
It was a little weird. I'm not sure if that's an issue with. Is that his real nose, or did they actually
I think that's a prosthetic.
Okay.
Looks like to make him look rugged, and it was distracting. I was like, that was a choice.
But they make him look like Bradley Woodford, from in a way.
Yeah, waiting for the next one. I guess till next Wednesday. Is that it? Every Wednesday for this one?
Yeah. I was not sure what to make of this because of the time travel implications of Loki not being around for everything that follows. He's critical in the other films. On the flip side, if Freya doesn't die, that does that mean Odin doesn't throw a fit and say we're just gonna, sit here and wait for the Dark Elves to come back? Does it have a completely different reaction? Is Asgard more willing to get engaged and they don't need Loki for that? Or does everything go to hell because of it? So there's a few things to think about.
But you guys tell me that this TVA, because as Josh knows, Gabby, right? I'm a big comic guy, but I'm old school. We're going back into the 19th century and the origins of comics, and platinum, Victorian, then platinum, then golden age. And I kind of stop in the silver bronze age when I was a kid. I'll buy and sell it, but I don't know the storyline. So I do not know the modern storylines. Is there a TVA in any of the comics, or is this completely made up for this series?
Yes. There could be some entities similar to the Timekeepers, but I think the Timekeepers are in line with the 70s weirdness that you saw in Captain Marvel, or some of the even some of the Thor storylines from the 70s that are the weird outer space, Adam Warlock type stories, where you get into eternity, or maybe a little bit with the Beyonders that we see in the end of the Marvel universe, where they tried doing their big that led to the war world that we saw. So they're definitely something similar. And if there were Timekeepers, I missed it because of I believe Jonathan Hickman, with his giant run that did all of this. But no, I think it's the TVA itself is completely new. And I think that's why I find it endearing. That's they're doing something bold and different, and they're not encumbered by any comic book story. So they're not pulling references from anything.
Right. Oh, true. Well, look, time travel stories are always very difficult because it's very easy to really mess it up and just not that we know the science of time travel, because we don't. We're all making it up anyway, presumably. Although I just watched the Big Bang Theory rerun the other night, and it was when they did the first episode of explaining how they first met, and when they signed the roommate, Sheldon and what's his name signed the roommate accord. He's like, and one of the clauses in the roommate agreement was, and as soon as we sign this, within 5 seconds, if either of us invented time travel, we'll make an appearance in the room right now. Well, that's disappointing, because nobody showed up. Yeah, DC used to do a ton of time travel stories, especially in the 60s. Superman went back in time all the time. And Marvel did it too, not as much. I remember Avengers 71. The Avengers went back into World War II and met the Invaders, which was a fantastic Avengers type organization, sort of the all-star society equivalent, Justice League, Justice Society, etc. On the Marvel side. But you run into so many problems and with time travel, and there was one kind of throwaway line that Loki and the agent, whatever his name is, had, where remember when Loki said something to the effect of, well, like basically, why am I in trouble? And I mean, look what the others did. I mean, they came back in time multiple times, to fix things, fighting Thanos. And his response was, the TVA guy's response was something like, well, that's because they were supposed to do that. I mean, that's just so easy just to throw that out. I mean, is that's going to explain everything? Because I don't know if that may be almost too simplistic to explain why everybody else is allowed to time travel except for Loki.
Yeah.
I can deal with that, and I'll just, Gabby, before you jump in, I was listening to the Imaginary Worlds podcast this morning where they were talking about guilty pleasures, and one of the movies was Highlander, and like the explanation of the in Highlander is, just like it's a throwaway line about stars being pimples in the night sky, and that's it, and no one cares about the math or anything else, and they just move on. So I'm fine with accepting it. It's like, okay, get me the goods now of what feed me, Seymour. Tell me what you're working with here. So I could live with it.
Yeah. I mean, what I think is beautiful about the MCU, and I can admit to watching every MCU movie multiple times, is that they're really playing, like, I would say 3D chess. They think these things out like 3 steps in advance. And I think, the way they're explaining time travel, and I think the way they explain a lot of things, is they're counting on their fans to be watching these movies and kind of be aware of things. And even if you're not consciously aware of it, you're subconsciously aware of it. So for example, with the time travel, and when the judge says, well, the Avengers were supposed to do that. And if you think about it, it's either it must be Endgame. So in Endgame, when Bruce goes to visit the Ancient One, and the Ancient One's explaining, the time stones, and she says that removing an Infinity Stone can cause a rift in the time continuum. And obviously they take the Infinity Stones, they save everybody, but then Steve takes them back. So he created a rift and then he put it back. So they really didn't disrupt the timeline. I mean, they disrupted it, but they fixed it. So whereas Loki was never supposed to happen, he branches off, and, that's 2012 MCU Loki. So you're not getting, the whole incident with the Dark Elves, with Frigga dying, with, them coming together to battle Hela, and kind of how Loki's trajectory changes Thor's trajectory, and he really influences Thor's story. So all of that is kind of knocking this storyline off course. And I think that's why he's, bigger infringement and a variant, if you will, than the Avengers, because they did kind of fix their own issue.
And with that, let's jump into some of the conundrums that we start seeing with this. As lawyers, we think about like fundamental fairness, due process, all that good stuff. So if you are a witness to a variant landing in your time stream,
these poor Mongolian farmers.
Yeah, and we don't know what year, so there's that. Like, are we talking Genghis Khan, or is this like 19th century? When are we?
Mm-hmm.
But the TVA shows up, takes Loki into apprehends Loki, and that's a separate discussion. But they set off this little reset device, so things go back the way they were supposed to, and stay on course. And Gabby raised the issue, should victims, bystanders of a time variance crimes be required to consent to the resetting of the timeline? Or is this a case of public safety and nationality? Is security outweighing that? And I mean, this sounds like something Mark could have written as well. So I took a guess.
Yeah, this was me. This was me rewatching it. And I'm rewatching the opening scene. And they just, Loki kind of dismisses the poor, I'm calling them Mongolian farmers, Mongolian individuals who are there. And the time keepers, the Minutemen, who are the kind of armed branch of the TVA, just kind of like, they grab Loki, they detain him, and then they're like, set the reset charge. And I was like, wait, nobody asked these people. Like, this is their memory. They clearly interacted with Loki. Like, nobody asked them if, they, needed to, if they were okay with having their memories erased. I mean, this is basically, I kind of saw it as the same kind of conundrum and consent issues, if you will, with like Men in Black, right? When Men in Black, when they would go up to somebody with a mind wipe and, like, look at the blinking light, like you're kind of erasing somebody's memories without somebody's consent. And that's hugely problematic. But at the same time, we've seen time and time again in cases that either public safety, security, depending on whether you're talking like a state level or a national level, kind of trumps those things. Fortunate choice of words, but they usually kind of supersede that a court, when weighing kind of an individual's rights, looks at the overwhelming public safety or national security, kind of the greater good, so to speak, they look at. So, I mean, if I'm the TVA, I'd be arguing, well, we're causing not by pruning the timeline, so to speak, right? Because by resetting it, they remove kind of any instance of Loki being there. And they're preventing a multiversal war, as Miss Minute says. And that could be considered the greater good. Because then if you think about it, if these people keep their memories, let's say the girl in France who has the bubble gum, right? And who sees the little kind of stick figure walking on the little on the device, which clearly does not exist in 16th century France. She could, go create kind of some advanced technology and become a variant herself. So I get it in some respects, but I also feel bad for those being wiped. It's just
that
really
was so easily explained in Star Trek IV: Voyage Home, when they had to get the plexiglass to put it in the ship for the whales, and Bones pulls Scotty aside and said he was about to give him the formula for the plexiglass to fit 6 inches, but withstand tons and tons of pressure. And McCoy's like, I don't think you can do this, Scotty. And Scotty's like, well, how do you know he didn't invent it in the first place? Good point.
Yeah, or this is because of the bubble gum, she meets a really cute guy. They eventually marry and have kids, and their great grandson is worse than Hitler. So
the butterfly effect.
Yeah, so there's that of like, yeah, you'd have a great life, but it's only gonna cost you like 80 million people. So
Yep.
Oops. Yeah, I don't have a problem with the reset because this could be something just way beyond our understanding.
Yeah.
And the other Marvel characters in traditional comics is the Fantastic Four that play with time travel all the time. And I mean, like all the time. And they we haven't seen them yet. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something they play with or not. And time will tell.
Sadly, they cannot go time travel and fix their own bad movies.
Yeah, well,
Right.
that was because of those bad movies. This is our reset, and so I
Sorry,
consider it a good thing.
I had to walk through that door. It was there. And I just had to do it. But maybe they'll pull a Deadpool and kind of poke fun at themselves. So we'll see.
It'll be the third reboot, and so yeah, where could go wrong? So let's talk bureaucracy, and Gabby, you love bureaucracy.
I do. I work in bureaucracy every day. It was comforting. I know most of us lawyers watch legal programs and kind of cringe at the thought of seeing any sort of legal what have you on screen. But just seeing the bureaucracy and just the kind of minutia, I think that's what's been great about both the Star Wars shows and the Marvel shows, is they're really kind of diving into these. They can kind of breathe in these little moments that you miss in a larger cinematic universe. And it's very silly, but it's, to me, very accurate. He's booked and processed, and evidence is handed over. One of the things that was funny for me is it's this very kind of 70s era layout, which a lot of our courtrooms here in Connecticut, some of our older buildings look like. So especially when he walks into the courtroom, I was like, oh my God, you had like 100 people and it's like short calendar in here. So it was just very, very accurate, the whole kind of process, except of course, when he gets to before the judge, which we'll talk about in a second. But the part that I loved is him signing a document. And I think he does what most everybody does, including lawyers, which he doesn't read when he's supposed to be signing, which is a little concerning because he's agreeing that is everything he's ever said, which he's Loki, he's the god of mischief, he's supposed to be thousands of years old. That does not seem like, if every page is something he said, that does not seem to even cover one Thor film. Like, that just seems like all he said maybe in one Thor film, not his entire 1,000-year life. So there could be documents not there. And I mean, that's kind of equivalent to signing wills. That's why, it's not required to sign when you're signing a will, to sign every page. I mean, he just signs the top, but most people common practice is to sign every page of a will, or initial it. So you're documenting that you've reviewed each page, and later when it's being reviewed, clearly somebody can't slip a document in there without your knowledge. So it's just, I was like, really? But then at the same time, I was like, I do that all the time with accepting like terms and agreements and stuff, terms of service.
Well, and he just saw someone get no, the disintegration hadn't happened yet. So so that was pre-disintegration, because I'm sure it's like after that he's really eager to show his ticket, because seeing a guy disintegrate into nothingness, like, is that non-existence?
Yeah,
like worse than death type of feeling. So maybe that would expedite one's feeling of like, I'm just going to sign.
Yep.
Mark,
sign my life away.
we're of overlapping generations. You do have a couple years on me. Did you find the 70s look comforting at all? Because I sure did.
I was more of an 80s fan than than the 70s. 60s, at least for music. I went 60s to 80s. I mean, there's still some music in the 70s that is good, but I vividly remember disco. And while there's some good beats in disco, it was not my time.
I was born during the 70s, so just like the look of it, it's oddly comforting. And like, from the little PSA cartoon, it's like, oh God.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. that brought back Schoolhouse Rocks and looking at that.
So let's jump into what authority does the TVA have? And Mark, you being the expert that you are in government, what were your thoughts in just watching this interdimensional organization? That do they look human in order for us to not go insane? Like, are they truly just like balls of energy? And is this like an ant looking at the the Department of Fish and Game and having no concept of what the Department of Fish and Game is doing, in their environment?
Yeah, it raises a ton of questions, correct? As lawyers, we always want to know, where's the authority come from that set these up, set this system up? Who are these people? And whether we're fans of Loki or not, or the Asgardians as gods, a little disconcerting that the gods don't seem to know about these other creatures that are clearly more powerful than they are, as we see in the moment when Loki, as he retrieves the Tesseract, and then he comes across the stones and none of them work. It's like, okay, if these don't work here, I give up. I'm done. That's it. Whatever you want from me, I'll go along with, for the most part. And presumably we will get more answers as we go along in this series to understand, who are these guys, right? I think back to Green Lantern and the Guardians, and Marvel with the Watchers, and even Galactus, and trying to get a sense of all of this, or even Thanos, who clearly would be puny to these folks, these timekeepers, and I'm still trying to get a sense of, are these people even not the timekeepers, everybody else, are they even human, or is this just the imagery? Because this is what it matches to, sort of the individuals that are present, because we don't see any other. I don't remember seeing any other alien races or anybody else that's on the planet. Are these humanoids? Because clearly from other Marvel Universe movies, we know there's tons of other creatures that are out there. You got talking raccoon rabbit things, and sticks and everything. So it's interesting that they made the humanoids the powerhouse, the ones who control the TVA and everything. Although maybe that was a budgetary issue. I don't know. They didn't want to have too many costumes.
Do they appear as kind of the avant-garde 70s look because of Loki's interaction with playing DB Cooper? And if that was like going through airport security and we're getting 1970s airport as the TVA, because that was like in Loki's mind what humanity could have been, from at least one interaction he had on Midgard for DB Cooper, is that how it renders? So that way he doesn't have a nervous breakdown, because it could be conceptually beyond his understanding. And it's like, let's see now, there are two different other pop culture stories. Babylon 5, the Vorlons appeared to each race as that race. So are we dealing with something like that? Or 2001 with the monolith, that Dave Bowman had to be asleep and just out of it in order to get ascended to be the Star Child, because that was something his mind could not process. So are we dealing with something along those lines with the timekeepers, that that they appear at, well, their workers appear as human, even though they appear as deity type individuals. So I don't know if we'll get answers, but that's at least my working theory.
And I mean, really like light power, just light power, as there have been some shows over the years. I want to say, I think Star Trek original series had something like that, as I recall, and other situations. Sometimes some of these explanations are practical in our real time, and I wonder if wherever this was filmed, if maybe like the 70s show was filmed on that lot and they just had a lot of 70s stuff left over. So they're like, okay, let's make it a 70s segment because it's going to be cheaper for production. I don't know.
The showrunner might have had just a fascination with it. Like, let's lean in and do this because it's fun. And I remember this stuff when I was a kid. So here we go.
Yeah, I think it just gives it a certain look. It's very much like, WandaVision. And if you've seen Avengers Assembled, which is the behind the scenes of WandaVision, they were very particular of how they shot WandaVision, and certain shows and, certain callbacks there. And I think, to your point, I'm going to throw in another pop culture reference for you, Josh. It's like in Doctor Who with the TARDIS. They visit all these planets and all these timelines. The people don't necessarily speak English or British English, but the TARDIS translates it for them. And that actually becomes its own story device, that the TARDIS being broken and not being able to translate. So it could be very much that this is how Loki sees it, how it appears to Loki, because we obviously have Casey, the individual he interacts with, the kind of peon TVA agent that doesn't know what a fish is. But we also know that there are other variants who are other, races, if you will, because there's a Skrull there when he shows up at the death. There's another Skrull variant that's being booked when he arrives at the TVA. So it's just interesting how they'll kind of play that. But I don't believe they are human, humanoid, but not human.
I think there was something similar. I'm thinking back to Star Trek: The Next Generation and that 2-part episode when they went back to the 1890s with Samuel Clemens, and because they had found Data's head in a cave in San Francisco from 500 years earlier, and the creatures that were killing everybody were these light energy creatures from another planet that took a humanoid form and would speak whatever language that they were in, culture-wise, as they bounced from location to location to take the life force from them.
I also just can't help but wonder, with a Doctor Who reference, if Tom Hiddleston is not doing his basically a shadow audition to be the Doctor.
He is.
Yeah,
it. Yeah. He's also he is a classically trained Shakespearean actor, which for anybody who has not watched his productions of like Henry V, I would highly, 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 highly go recommend it. But yeah, he overacts the crap out of these Thor movies. To like watching him and Anthony Hopkins and then Chris Hemsworth, no disrespect to Chris Hemsworth, but like there's two very high caliber actors and then Chris Hemsworth. So he's a really superior actor.
But that leans into what Thor is, because Thor could be kind of brutish, and this version of Loki is very different than the comic version, because the comic version is truly a villain, and they're like the Walt Simonson run on Thor had did play that up, but during the Sultor War, that you do see Loki join forces with his dad and brother to defend Asgard, and that fight is pretty bitchin'. Worth checking out the Walt Simonson trade paperbacks from that era. But this is different. And I think that's because Hiddleston is just a nice guy. and the way that they wrote him and the way that the character became endearing, even though he's like has a murder count of at least 50 people and led a war of aggression to invade Earth, normally problematic. You don't get to like reform that character easily.
Yeah.
What they did here. And so I'm curious to see where they go. And we can do more of the character study after we get through some of the legal analysis. But let's talk about the actual trial. And Mark, you have the most trial experience out of all of us. I would say, when Loki appears before Miss Minutes, who seems like she's acting like an ALJ. There's no prosecutor or defense attorney, and you get sentenced and obliterated. Doesn't seem to be any due process there, or it's poor due process. At least the charge is read, and they do reference a number, so that was kind of nice. Granted, it's not like we have that book, so we can go look it up. But what were your reactions to seeing that hearing?
Well, I was trying to figure out, like, I mean, of course, Loki couldn't stop talking, which goes to Gabby's point of there's no way that stack of papers was everything he ever said. He just can't stop talking. But I was trying to figure out, if you end up in that courtroom, how are you not guilty? I mean, is there even a process there? I mean, they didn't explain really the guy who came before, who decided not to take the ticket and then got incinerated, vaporized without even having to go before the judge, because the security guard, bailiff, whatever the guy was, just vaporized him. But it just seemed to me, and I'm trying to think of some analogy. I'm sure I could come up with it from some comic book story or sci-fi movie. But I mean, it was preordained. I mean, it was almost like a farce.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's tons of movies. They're like going through my mind, just kind of flying through without any type of specificity. But it was just like, why even bothering with this? I would think that's what I was thinking, is, why are we even bothering with this? I mean, you're these supreme beings. You've already decided this person has violated the timeline and this has to be resolved. Why are you putting them through this fake trial process to do what?
That's a good question. And maybe it just goes to an issue that fundamental fairness is universal, and that summary executions are inherently unfair. So they do get an opportunity to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. And in Loki's case, he does get, I don't know if probation is the right term, or if it's like another 48 hours, but it's like, no, he could be useful here. Let's just not get rid of him.
He's almost turned like in a confidential informant, because he does become, in a sense, I would imagine, employed by the TVA to fulfill this larger purpose of taking out a bigger bad, if you will. And it's just, what I found bizarre is that comes after he's been sentenced. Normally, to become a confidential informant, that would somehow reduce your sentence or kind of mitigate your sentence in some way, would happen before. It would be part of your plea bargain. He's already been sentenced. And then Mobius steps up and says, like, oh, no, wait, like, I got this. And it does really seem a sham. You know, you have the video with Miss Minutes where she's like, you're a variant, and which is slightly terrifying. I mean, I don't know about you, but the fact that you could cause a Nexus event from causing a war to simply being late to work. And I was just like, what? That's too much. But, you know, the introductory video is, like, yeah, basically you caused this branch, you have to be pruned, which is what they, keep calling it. You have to be pruned and put back on the regular timeline, the sacred timeline. So when he goes in front of, I believe, Judge Renslayer, she kind of issues the sentence. She's like, "How do you plead? Here's your charge." But again, as you said, it was already predetermined. Like, everybody knew what was going to happen to him, and it almost seems like, that's why the guards, the Minutemen were kind of enabled to kind of use this force to prune them. It was like, we either prune you now, like when we first get there, we prune you when you're being booked, or we prune you after you've gone through this sham trial. Either way, it's going to happen. So it was very bizarre, but I did appreciate it. And I'm still waiting for, all the kind of Marvel, Star Wars legal dramas and political dramas, waiting patiently.
There's an element of time cop to this, because they do have a tribunal there that's very, very quick for sentencing somebody, and there's an opportunity to be heard, but it's a one-way ticket, and there's echoes of that in this. It's different than most of the things I've seen before. And maybe with a lot of meditation, I could remember other examples, but I was not sure on how I would feel about this, and I'm loving it. One episode in, just because it's original, and a lot of these Marvel shows and movies can fall into a formula. This one it's different. It is just very different, and we can see where they're going. Since Mark, I believe you'll need to jump off soon, I want to hit DB Cooper before we get into any of the other issues. What was your reaction?
I was sitting there watching, and I'm like, "Are you actually doing DB Cooper?" And by the way, and I think if I remember, I think he introduced himself as DB Cooper on the plane.
Yeah,
because what's interesting about this, and it's the only way it would make sense for people to watch it, but the actual hijacker, and Gabby probably doesn't know this, but so I was the lawyer. I still am the lawyer for a cold case team of experts who have studied the DB Cooper skyjacking of 1971. And this individual who jumped out of a plane at 10,000 feet in the nighttime, not in the daytime as it was in this episode, with $200,000, which is like 1.3 million in today's money, and disappeared. And they never found his body, and they've only found about $6,500 of the $200,000 in all these years. And we investigated the case, and we identified an individual who we believe to be the skyjacker, and he died about a year or so ago. And I am in court litigating the DB Cooper skyjacking case currently.
Oh, God.
Suing the FBI for its entire investigative file. I just got a few hundred more pages just the other day. So what was interesting about him saying DB Cooper, that's the only way it would make sense. And it probably went over so many people's heads. They had no idea what this scene was about at all. It's a folklore story now that this guy has become a hero, especially in the Northwest where it happened, up in Oregon. It's in that region. But he wasn't DB Cooper. His actual name was Dan Cooper, which was a fake name. And a reporter mistakenly, for some reason, called him DB Cooper in a newspaper article, and then the name just stuck. So there never was any DB Cooper, but it was a weird. I'll have to go and see if I can find a conversation with the producer, director, writers, and it's like, why did you put in other than I guess the 70s connection, put in DB Cooper into this scene?
But it's not the only time travel story that's dealt with it. There was in 2007 time frame, there was a show called Journeyman, which guy kind of leaped through time, and it focused in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I loved it because that's where I grew up, and it kept touching on periods from my childhood and areas I was. But it was a victim of the writer's strike. But one of the stories involved DB Cooper, and the main character ends up with the money, and like is jumping back to present day, which would have been in 2007, and then drops the money off sometime in the 70s, so that way he doesn't have the stolen money in his present day. But again, just fascinating stuff to play with. And I did not know that about you, but that's just because you're the gift that keeps on giving with just amazing information that blows your mind.
Which is weird. You do all these things and it's connected to these storylines in these fantasy sci-fi movies, superhero movies. And it's just, it was just a weird thing to watch and about that scene. But it was fun. And as I was telling you before, when we were offline, the flight attendant, that woman had a nervous mental breakdown in the aftermath of the real skyjacking. And you can see her on the History Channel 2-part episode that aired 5 years ago that we were involved with, where the FBI set us up and brought this woman who nobody had seen for years and years to say that the person we thought was DB Cooper, she did not recognize him. And he did wear that black tie, and he had sunglasses. And he did have a suitcase, and he said, as he said in this episode with the note, "Tell the pilot I have a bomb," and that's what he had on the note. But she had a mental breakdown, and she doesn't remember. She doesn't remember much of the hijacking. So they didn't go into great detail about this episode, and who knows where the money went, and why Loki needed a parachute, and why that event. I don't know. That was just strange.
I have a theory on why that made it into the episode, into the series. I think somebody that the haircut or wig or whatever whatever it was that Tom Hiddleston was wearing is a look I've seen him wear in other films. And I'm sure somebody was planning Loki, and they're sitting around a writer's room table, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to make this Loki show, and it's going to be about time travel and blah, 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 blah." And somebody's like, "Man, you imagine Tom Hiddleston with sunglasses on? He looks just like DB Cooper." And they're like, "We got to put it in the show." And it was just a throwaway thing of, "Oh, I made a bet with Thor," and that's how it ended up.
So, but that bet with Thor also makes Thor an accessory. And like, this is so problematic because Loki has a body count. So like, prosecuting Loki is already big. But if we get the cold case of like he was DB Cooper and said, "I got a bomb," whether or not he actually did or not, they believed him. And so you have hijacking and air piracy because they land, passengers are offloaded. He's got the bomb that looked like an L-1011 because of the ramp in the back. And it's just Thor could be prosecuted for that. And you might go like, "Well, about the statute of limitations?" It's like, well, they didn't know he was part of it. Like, so how could they have discovered it? So now, granted, going after royalty in Asgard is problematic, but we don't want sovereign immunity does not include, or diplomatic immunity, which is an offshoot of sovereign immunity, doesn't include you get to go commit crimes in air piracy in U.S. airspace. So again, just chalk that up to the list of crimes that Loki has for the attack on New York. But
that was a humorous little anecdote there. I'll tell you another thing I was thinking, not a legal issue, but I guess there were the two characters that were doing it, where obviously because of this collar thing that they were putting on people, that or at least on Loki, that they can make them kind of go back in time. So right, every time he would try an attack, boom, flip the switch, and he goes back in time, meaning he goes back distance-wise away from them. And hey, I can do this all day. And every time when you've got these all powerful people, which clearly whoever these creatures are, whatever they are, they're offset of technology, whether they're powerful individually or not, but the technology is way powerful. And I'm just thinking, this makes no sense whatsoever that this is their fall safe to prevent someone from attacking them, because it's a good thing it was Loki who moves at normal speed. If they had grabbed Quicksilver, it never would have worked and they would have been done. And even then, Loki still gets away. At least, obviously, he doesn't get away, but he gets away and causes havoc and turns the table on both of them for a while. And to me, it just doesn't make sense, because it's humorous. It's fun storyline. It doesn't have to make sense, I guess, but it's got this weird dichotomy of, you're so technologically superior and more powerful, and yet this happened. You stop the stones, but Loki's bouncing around from room to room, and you can't seem to figure out how to catch him until he just sits down and says, "I give up because I can't go anywhere."
It raises the issue with the end of the episode with the Minutemen, because somebody gets the jump on them with laying a trap, and they think they're going after a time traveler from, like, what was it, the third millennium or something of that nature, and it's like they instead get gasoline soaked, or they thought it was oil, but that oil really burned quickly, so maybe gas, and taken out with a lamp and a fire, so they're mortal. And if they are human, those would be human remains. So it raises all these wonderful issues with the timekeepers might be the alien super beings that we cannot comprehend. And do they have like a division of humans that they've made?
Or cleanups. There must be a cleanup squad, because, as you say, if they were not vaporized or have some sort of some device or technology that gets rid of their remains, then we've got some strange remains that are found on the planet there, perhaps. So who knows?
Well, it's one thing if dead humans show up in the 19th century. It's another thing if they show up with super tech on them, or if it happens like 5000 BC, and that really screws up archaeology by going like, what the hell happened here? Like that, like it'd be like finding the 50,000-year-old airplane. It's just like, that should not exist. How did that get here? So
Stargate.
Is it something like that, of something got sent back, but that would again be proof of time travel, which they're trying to avoid from happening, even though it does show that time travel eventually does become a commodity.
I don't know. All I know is I made a pledge that if I invent time travel or know somebody who did, they're going to show up on this podcast exactly at this moment.
No.
It didn't work.
It'd be weird if it did.
Someone popped behind me.
Yeah.
Just go like this. Look behind.
Yes, I'm from 2090. What? How am I still around? Good times. So there's a lot to unpack there with this episode on the nerd front. And then the videos of Loki, which again is like the 1970s, early 80s educational films that they had. So they really do lean in onto that theme of this is your life. And it reminds me of elementary school, which is, again, a weird feeling to go like, oh, this is oddly familiar, but not. There would be evidentiary issues with having that in. And Gabby, you jumped on a bunch of those. Can you share some of your analysis?
It's interesting and kind of good for Loki that, this video kind of plays after he's been sentenced and I guess resentenced to be a confidential informant. And, you know, basically it's his life story. And if that had been brought, you know, before, clearly it's in their possession, because it's not something Loki turns over. But it's very much propensity evidence. I mean, it could not have been used to show that he was in fact a time variant. Although in a sense, that's what Mobius tries to do, is like, this is how your life would have played out had you stuck around. But it includes a lot of his crimes, and that is like a major rule in federal rules of evidence, state rules of evidence, that you cannot use propensity evidence. It's Federal Rules of Evidence 404b1, that evidence of any crime, wrong act, any wrongdoing cannot be used against a person in order to show that they acted basically, that because you committed a crime once, it cannot be used to show that you committed the crime now. It's to this concept that your trial exists in kind of a, not necessarily a vacuum, but it exists in its particular, that, you know, you can't be held responsible for the previous things you do. There are ways to get that evidence in. One of the ways is obviously if a defendant takes the stand in his own defense, which is why a lot of people counsel their clients out of defendants testifying. But again, it goes to that idea of the defendant opening the door. If the defendant says something, so for example, you know, if Loki kind of invokes the Avengers, and if the opposing counsel, which there's not any in this case, feels that that is a kind of incomplete or misstated record, they can bring forth what would otherwise be inadmissible evidence, including propensity evidence, to complete the record, to perfect the record. So it is interesting that, you know, this is kind of the world's longest rap sheet that he has, that's in video format. But yeah, it would just be interesting that it could be possibly used against him, which goes to an earlier point that he was not Mirandized at all. And Mirandizing, you know, reading somebody their rights, making sure they're aware that they have the right to an attorney, that they have the right to remain silent, is something that's not actually unique to the United States. It's something they have in the UK, in Europe. Many countries have that kind of form of no, you know, informing a detained suspect of their rights before they can proceed, which he is not given at all in any shape or form. So my crim professor would object strongly to that.
Yeah, but nicely done. And it does raise, you know, this is an issue of character. And so where Loki ends up at his death in the beginning of Infinity War shows him like going beyond just simply playing the villain who's supposed to make other people better. And, you know, so he doesn't experience his mom dying. He doesn't experience his dad dying. He doesn't experience, you know, trying to save the people of Asgard and then sacrificing himself to save his brother. He doesn't experience all that, but he gets to see the greatest clips. So it clearly has an impact on him because, and I was curious to see, like, okay, we're still at war criminal Loki, and he watches the films and he's sitting there broken at the end of it because it's a little rough to watch both parents die and then how you die and like not go completely insane. So like his revelation about why he does the things that he does, that he doesn't like hurting people, like it's I mean, like that's actual character analysis and self-realization. So I appreciated that, and I was curious to see where they were going to go, and I'm glad they went there, that he saw what would happen. And did either of you have reactions to that?
I mean, it was powerful for me because obviously, he sees Frigga dying the first time when he and Mobius are watching the clip, and it obviously affects him, just as it did in Thor: The Dark World, because obviously he's much closer with his mother. But then that's the first clip he watches again, right? Because he's kind of experiencing this trauma again, almost like secondhand. And I think the two clips he watches after that, yes, the second one is Odin dying, but it's also Odin acknowledging him as a son, because he says, I love you, my sons. And he looks to Loki and he acknowledges him as a son, which 2012 Loki did not, he had just been kind of denied by Odin, and, you were the adopted one,
I'm going to jump in there because the last thing Odin says to him in the original Thor movie is, "You are my son." And then Loki drops off, and that's will end up in Avengers. So those are the last words his father said to him before he went on his murder spree. Again, he's a complex character. So, and like anyone, he loses it when he sees, his dad die as well after watching his mom die multiple times.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too was the love he saw from Thor. Like, the fact that somebody wrote that the reason why the clip ends when Thor is embracing him is because that was the last thing Loki felt, that he didn't actually die when Thanos snapped his neck, that he faded as Thor was embracing him. That broke me.
Aww. But it is also interesting, again, when you're dealing with a storyline of incredibly powerful beings, and obviously Loki is trying to understand, where is he, right? He's a god. He doesn't know who any of these people are, or creatures, or whatever they are. This can't be real. Maybe this is some weird situation that he's in. And he sees these videos, which clearly impact him. But you would think, especially the devious Loki, he might be thinking, this is all manipulated. I mean, these creatures have so much technology and scientific ability, or whatever, or manipulation. How do I know this is even real? Which obviously for the storyline, they need to have the character just accept it as real so they can move on. But yet at the same time, he wasn't sure if he was a robot. I thought that, if I think back, that was like the funniest scene, I think, for me, of the whole episode, when he wasn't sure. He's like, wait a minute, what if I'm a robot and I don't know I'm a robot? So what happens if I go through this? You're going to evaporate completely. See what happens. I thought that was pretty funny.
They're letting Tom Hiddleston be himself, or at least his interpretation of the character, and that's fun. So, there's a lot to be said for just having a couple characters and a very specific focus. And when we get to the reveal at the end that the variant that they have to go out and hunt, is Loki himself, in his reaction of, what? It made me think of the original Adam Warlock stories, where he found out that the Magnus, the entity that he would eventually have to face and fight, was the future version of himself. And I don't know if it's a future version of himself, which could be kind of a theme that happened with Kang the Conqueror and Immortus, or if it's just another variant, or there are those who are wondering if it's Mephisto. So there's all of these weird twists and turns on what could it be, but it's a great way to end the first episode with a say what moment of who's the guy in the cloak that just murdered several people. So
I mean, in trying to figure out, so if Loki died at the hands of Thanos, and that is the primal timeline, where would this other Loki variant come from that would be more murderous than the one we're seeing as the primary character?
Yeah. I mean, what I think is, I'm kind of the group that, this version that they're chasing, is would be Loki herself, and this is Lady Loki. And as we saw, I was watching it back and I was like, wow, that's a little on the nose when they were doing the Miss Minutes educational video, and they're like, you know, you're going about your day, and these events called a nexus event can lead to a branch timeline, which, if left unchecked, could cause another multiversal war. And I was like, WandaVision, or Wanda, is a Nexus level being. She's gonna next appear in Multiverse of Madness. So I was like, little on the nose there. But I think that may play into it, and we are gonna see that in true kind of bureaucracy form, they are focused on the problems that aren't really problems, and kind of ignoring the things that they should be focusing on. And I think there's probably like this multiversal incident coming, and that's how we got kind of this Lady Loki and the kind of multiverse that we're setting up to in Doctor Strange. So that's where I see her coming from. I do think it's Lady Loki, because they obviously have, I believe the actress's name is Samantha DiMartino, who's a still yet unnamed character, which I think they're not good about casting kind of series level characters, not just kind of one-off characters, and being like hiding them, as we saw with Agatha Harkness. They tried to keep that under wraps, but it was kind of the most obvious reveal.
But that's a great theory. It also explains why she was at the London premiere with Hiddleston. And it's like, but I'm not telling you who I am.
I know. I mean, I don't understand. This is me as a communications director. I don't understand the logic behind having what I would call a series regular star who is billed as such a kind of series character, and then parade them out at press events, and yet, I can't tell you who I'm playing. It's just bizarre. Like, I get like Julia Louis-Dreyfus in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. They brought her into set on in a cloak. Like, they kept her completely under wraps. That I can understand, but like, it's just bizarre. It's a bizarre choice.
Yeah, here's the thing: keep it secret. It's like people are going to watch anyway, and do the big reveal that gets everyone's jaws to drop, as opposed to like hiding in plain sight in the worst way possible.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. It's a bizarre strategy, but we're all watching it and watching it, so it must work somehow.
Yeah, friends, I'm going to take leave of us this evening, but I look forward to watching and analyzing future episodes of this and any other Marvel Universe. Hey, maybe even a DC program one of these days.
Hey, the HBO Max stuff is awesome. So, but again, another live stream that we can get into that. Right. So
we will do.
Have a great night, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Enjoy, my friends. Marvel to you.
Yes. True believers.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we did get through most of the analysis. So that is good. And more importantly, we found out Mark actually is related to an ongoing part of the DB Cooper cold case. So what were the odds of that?
I feel like anybody who's watching this is probably like, oh, you guys so planned this. Like, you brought Mark on to analyze this show because, he has the connection with DB Cooper. But honestly, I saw your face, Josh, and you were just as surprised as I was. Like, that was just like, what? That was out of left field.
On the same time, I'm not surprised, because So Mark is somebody I just like hanging out with because he's smart and super nice, and he's a full on nerd. Like he collects stuff. It's just his collection's awesome, and he's a nice guy. And the cases he does are important. He helps people, and he's somebody who's represented clients at peril to himself. And that's a very brave thing that lawyers are supposed to do. And most of us don't have that happen.
Yep.
He has. And just kudos to him because he does his job. He represents being an attorney very well. But I've noticed in my life when things that have like a 1 in a billion chance of happening with me can be like 1 out of 2. And it's like, oh, naturally, you've done a FOIA request to the FBI. Okay, I'm not surprised. That follows suit with everything else I do in life. So,
I mean, the closest connection I have to the Loki show right now is the fact that, and it still has not come up in the show. So if it doesn't, I will be very sad. Is the hotel that they film at. Which we see in the trailer footage of the what I guess is the wide shot of the elevator in the TVA is actually at, I believe, the Marriott in Atlanta, and I have actually stayed there. So, and I've ridden in that elevator, and I thought it was very cool at the time. This was years ago when I was in college, and so that's my very sad connection to the Loki series.
I also have stayed in that hotel for Anita's. I was there in my CT summation days, going to Atlanta to speak at an private e-discovery event about the then 2006 amendments to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. But it's like, oh yeah, okay, that does make sense now. So it's one of the Atlanta shows.
I was like, I've been there. So
like, this stuff I can just accept and enjoy because it's just like full day of work, stressful week with, handling client matters and, trying to do my best. And just to come home on a Wednesday and get to watch this, it's like, okay, because I was concerned that this would just be jumping into alternate timelines and showing end of the world type stuff because Loki wasn't in the place that he was supposed to be. With like all the times that the Avengers could have lost, because like if Thor hadn't been there, they all would have died, or like that sort of. And it's like, okay, that could get old fast. But if this is going to be weird, sci-fi, creative, like we don't necessarily have to lean into the other movies that took place. We're going to do our own thing. So it's not just like this nostalgia tour of, the past decade in the MCU. I'm very down with that.
Yeah. I mean, what I like is so several things. So I think what's super cool is since we closed the book on Endgame, we are seeing a new decade of the MCU start. So we're kind of going back in a sense to the early days of like, when we were setting up things in like Iron Man, the first Iron Man movie. I also like the fact with these Marvel television shows, they're exploring mental health. We saw it with WandaVision. We saw it with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, also deep concepts like race. And now like seeing the kind of psychology of somebody who's kind of gets their knees cut out from under them, right? Like he's no longer Loki. He's removed from the timeline. He has his kind of all his powers taken away from him. And like, who is he really? And what I like too is that I think with Thor Ragnarok, we saw this kind of shift in Marvel storytelling where it was okay to be silly and it was okay to make jokes. I mean, obviously there were jokes in like Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff, but I always felt like more kind of lighthearted comic humor needed to kind of balance out the action, whereas Thor Ragnarok was full on Taika Waititi and, just kind of craziness. And this seems to kind of lean into that a little bit. And they're like, he's the god of mischief. we're going to make him the god of mischief. Like, he doesn't need powers to do that. Just like you saw in Thor Ragnarok, when it's like, oh, what are you the god of again? The god of thunder. Like, you don't need a hammer. He doesn't need powers to be. And you see that when he kind of gets the jump on the Minutemen and he's kind of running around the place. He's mischievous. And I think that's, he's a chess player. He's, thinking kind of ahead of how he can kind of get out of things. And I think that's going to be really cool to see. And obviously to see Tom Hiddleston play to fully lean into that, it's going to be really cool.
This is a show that exists because of the actor and the fact that people fell in love with a villain and they went like, well, let's just have him get less bad. Let's have him get helpful. And then we'll give him a hero's death and we're going to overlook all the crimes that he commits. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's very rare for that to happen.
I like that the MCU has kind of gone in that direction with some of their villains, because it's not just, it kind of started with Loki, but it's not just Loki. It's, and really, they've kind of filled in the backstory of why he is, and now we got kind of a full confession of it, of why he is the way he is. But you saw that with Killmonger. You saw that with, darn, I'm blanking on the name.
Zemo's one of the other
Zemo, yeah, you saw that with Zemo, and getting these kind of, even Thanos. Like, Thanos, you're like, he's a murdering whatever, but I kind of see where he's like, they built that you can kind of see where he's coming from. And obviously they still have their kind of one-off villains who are just bad to be bad. But giving these complexities, I think, is a really interesting story perspective, because it's a very human perspective.
Not everyone could be John the Bastard.
Yeah,
I'm just here to be the villain. It's like, okay, you can do that once.
Yeah,
you can't have every story be someone trying to destroy a civilization or a apocalypse level event. That can't be all the time, because if it's all the time, that's just lazy storytelling. And everyone just, it's like,
that is the third act of Man of Steel, that, as my film professor said, is needless destruction for no reason, that it's just, let's just flatten a town, like, just down.
Yeah, for giggles. And it's just, and then some neck snapping. And this is, again, just to draw the distinction, those who make Marvel movies across the board understand the characters. Zack Snyder does not.
Yeah.
And that's all I really need to say about that.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't.
We don't want to invite like the hate of all the crazy Zack Snyderverse people. But one thing I did want to say and highlight is, obviously this is starting a new decade of the MCU. We're going into more cosmic villains and more cosmic problems, if you will. And one thing I thought was really cool is you have the whole kind of first decade of Marvel led up to Infinity War and Thanos, and it was like the Infinity Stones, right? Like, Thanos is like, the worst of the worst, and, snapped the entire half the universe out of existence. And this is like the most epic threat we've ever faced. Like, the threat level was through the roof. And then, we've obviously seen the trailer for the Eternals. It's like, where were the Eternals this whole time? I loved how they just so simply shifted to like, okay, we're on a different problem now. When they opened that drawer and we're like, those Infinity Stones that you thought were so rare and so like, cosmic level kind of threat, and there's only 5, and they're just this, MacGuffin that like is, the rarest thing in the universe. The guy has them sitting in his drawer, and there's people who use them as paperweights. And I was like, clearly on a different level now. Like we defeated one boss, and now we're at the next level. Like that, it was just such a simple device, but just so it was amusing. But the deeper kind of connotations of that were really impressive. That they just did this whole shift in one simple kind of motion. That just completely changed the stakes of where they were playing in the game of the MCU. Yeah, it was just great. Casey is by far my favorite character so far. Which, by the way, I have to mention, since you and I are the along with Thomas, are the original podcasters for our Mandalorian podcast. The actor who plays Casey is actually one of the krill farmers in the Blue Harvest episode of Mandalorian. And I believe he's actually the krill farmer that goes to get the Mandalorian. So he's the one who contracts the Mandalorian. So full circle, guys. Full circle.
Good catch. And that okay. So he's just a character actor who keeps working. Good for him. And if he's getting Disney Plus money and hired frequently, if he's living maybe in Atlanta or LA and they just keep using him, good. Good for him.
Get that Disney Plus money.
Yeah, good. I believe in you, buddy. I believe. Because I didn't pick up on that. That's good catch.
That was not my catch. That was actually thanks to Twitter. But I saw that and I was like, but definitely had to bring that up because we do both. We do both Star Wars and Marvel. So good on him for crossing universes. We have several characters in the MCU, like New Master 35 and the guy from the Bronx, or I'm sorry, from Queens, who sees Spider-Man, and now he's in the Shang-Chi trailer. But those are recurring kind of very minor characters, whereas this guy crossing universes, getting that Disney Plus money.
Good for him. This things I was thinking about. Casey references his entire life has basically been in that office. Do they not have lives as we understand them? That they just work all the time and that's his existence. Does that mean that he was just created and that's what he does?
Yeah, I was thinking about that when we were talking about this earlier, that they mentioned, and I think there's a lot to like dissect out of the Missed Minutes video, is they mentioned that the the stuff, they make the sacred timeline, they save the universe, but then they say they create, basically the friendly TVA staff. And, as the judge says, she's there, they dictate the proper flow of time and she's there to dictate time to their dictations, right? So it's basically like these humanoid, human-ish race, for lack of a better term, that the timekeepers created to run the TVA, and that's where they exist. So are they immortal? They say the time functions differently there, so who knows? They're just kind of little machines to run the TVA, and some of them, like Casey, become pencil pushers.
And Grandmaster on Sakaar, time functioned differently there. Now, granted, he's supposed to be the brother of the Collector, but they are celestial beings as well, of just different from humanity, way different lifespans, way different level of existence. The timekeepers and their workforce, I think, are more than just existing out of time. They exist for that reason.
Yeah.
And which raises weird issues of freedom. Because, we chose to be lawyers. Like, we weren't created for that purpose. Those folks are created, or at least it looks like they were created to do specific things, as opposed to being selected, like being recruited into the TVA. Because like they're able to speak every language along the timeline,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still mortal.
Yep.
It's all the weird, funky sci-fi stuff from the 70s comics that I'm just really digging right now, because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it is a new playing field. I'm down with it. I wasn't sure if I'd be down with this one, and already I feel way better about it than I did Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Yes.
Just because that
Hands
was
down.
it was we've Mark and I ripped that apart, but
I was not a fan. I was very disappointed. Not a fan. I loved, I should say, I loved Sam's storyline. I loved Bucky's storyline. Walker, they just
they dropped the
took the
ball.
last episode and they just like crapped on it. And I do think, though, in all fairness, although given the articles that came out, I do think the writers were watching a different show than the rest of us. But I think a large part of the problem with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier was the reshoots, when they had to cut a large portion of the storyline. So I think that lent itself to the kind of clunky feeling of the show, because trying to fix a storyline at last minute. So they had to cut this whole virus storyline out of the show because of the coronavirus. And so that's why there's parts that seem like, when Carly's stealing vaccines, and Mama Danya dies, and they're just like, oh, she had tuberculosis. Like, no, she died of whatever, like the disease, this global disease was. But they're like, oh my God, we're in a global pandemic. This is not a good look for a TV show. So I think that was what really caused. So a lot of the reshoots, they're delivering lines off screen, re-recorded lines, and just like odd camera angles.
I did not know that. But the way that they play the Flag Smashers was clearly pre-January 6th.
Yes, that was another thing.
Again, it's like you if you're going to lean into that, you got to lean into it and go.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I looked at it was they were trying to play the Flag Smashers to appeal to those who believe in America, as those are all crazy MAGA people.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we want all the crazy MAGA people to think the Flag Smashers are Antifa. You can't do both.
Do both. I agree with you. I think like they started with this really good like no borders theme. And I was like, oh, like I really love that. Like I have a lot of friends in the kind of, immigration activism community, and like, the idea of their symbol being a butterfly, because a butterfly moves without borders. And then they just kind of like, nope. They're like, all lives matter. And I was like, nope. And I was just like, no, you can't do both.
It's one or the other. And the other thing was, and Mark and I went into this, their political motivation made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because if half the planet dies and then 5 years later comes back, the resurrected people aren't the ones in charge anymore.
Yeah.
Their resources are gone. They're not the ones displacing. So the idea that the survivors or the snap are the ones being put into internment camps, and it's like, no, that would not be the case. It would be the displaced people would be the returned. It's like, sorry, your house was sold and bulldozed, and your bank accounts sheeted to the state. You got nothing. Sorry. Like that would, it's like, you used to be a billionaire. You're not anymore. But they don't do that. They try this weird game of just a very nonsensical plot.
Yeah. And I think part of that was because they had to cut the
Virus.
virus storyline. And I think what was super problematic of having like this, initial kind of no borders kind of thing, and then like, oh, they slowly dissolved into, like a white power, alt-right, all lives mattering, MAGA people group, is that you have them led by a young biracial woman and multiple people of color in their group. And I'm like, like, no, this doesn't work.
It's like you can't do it all. Like you have to pick a storyline and go with it, and they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And it just highlights that the Captain America stories can be hard, because if you're going to play like global politics, you have to set the rule for the global politics and then just do it.
Yeah.
And then you have to understand how global politics work. Senators do not have executive authority.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't grant pardons. Senators are not attending a UN type meeting. They don't do that.
Yeah.
And like the Constitution wanted to get rewritten to make it senators like independent executives from the executive branch.
Yep.
Like that's just they failed civics.
Yep.
And that was just super painful to watch.
Yeah.
Because it's like you had a great plot line with those who had privilege and autonomy coming back after being dead for 5 years, and everything's different. It'd be like, what do you mean the capital of technology is now Salt Lake City? Like, it just, they could do weird things like that of, yeah, there's no entertainment in LA anymore. It's all Atlanta. Like you could and that would have been, people in LA have come back. It's like, what just happened?
Or you could cut the whole Flag Smashers storyline and just had John Walker. Like, the man got blood on the Captain America shield, and then he walked, and then they were like buddies, and there was so much to unpack there that I think they did a disservice to the unpacking of that. A forced white man to carry the Captain America shield because a black man, like they could have unpacked so many layers with that they were just like, nope, we're gonna throw this storyline in there.
Yeah, because the Walker storyline from the 80s is impressive, and that, if you haven't read it, I know what to get you for a birthday or Christmas gift, because that it's very well done, and like it ticked off a lot of people because the government tells Steve, you can't be Captain America anymore unless you like do what we say. So Steve turns in the shield and the uniform and walks, and we see him later, and he just goes by the Captain after hanging out in Wakanda. He gets the black uniform that U.S. Agent eventually will take, and Black Panther makes him a new shield. And that one is pure vibranium as opposed to the one that was the original shield, which is a mix of vibranium and antianium. And so like it functioned a little differently. So it's Cap trying to figure out how the shield is different and how it works. And Walker going off the deep end. Now to go to the TV show, to have Captain America behead someone that's live streamed on social media, he would not walk.
Especially they call it an international incident, and they're like, oh no, go. I was like, I understand white privilege to a degree, but that's pushing it. That is pushing it.
You don't get to. You beheaded a man.
I was like, that doesn't even exist in the bounds of reality. That's like, that would never happen. And also, a senator holding like this bizarre court-martial type thing. I was like, what is this?
Just, again, like not legal at all. Like that's. It's like that's not. It's like sure they could go up and berate him, but he's still going to get prosecuted.
Yeah. And the fact that they're determined whether he gets a court-martial or not, I was like, What?
That's not how due process works at all. So
Yeah.
no.
I was clearly they left out the lawyers for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, brought him back for Loki, so I am glad to see that. And hopefully they will continue to be around for other Marvel shows in the future, because that was just a mistake.
It was so painful. It just and Sharon Carter being the worst supervillain ever. I'm going to make the phone call announcing my plans outside the building where I was just hired, because in broad daylight.
Yep.
Just horrid.
But in all fairness to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Sam landing with the wings in front of the cop car, carrying the injured slash, or no, he was carrying the dead Carly.
Corpse. Yeah.
Was by far
Perfect.
the most beautiful shot I've ever seen in the MCU.
They got the meaning of Captain America right. And so like that was it's why it's so uneven.
Exactly.
And that's also the danger with making a Captain America movie is the potential for corniness or people not accepting it is high. And they succeeded with the Captain America movies because between Chris Evans knowing what he was doing and having competent writers, they were able to tell a story that was Cap.
Mm-hmm.
And the comics over the 80 years have done a fantastic job at tackling political issues. Going back to like the leader of the Serpent Society was President Nixon. Like it just like, which is why Cap, again, Steve quits and becomes Nomad because he's super pissed off about that. And that was pre-Watergate.
Mm-hmm. Oh, God.
Yeah. So yeah, pre-resignation. So
also, just like those were the days of political scandal. The good old days.
Third-rate burglary. Oh God.
Please forgive me. I should put my disclaimer in. All opinions are my own. Nothing I say reflects back on my caucus or any members of my employment in any way, shape, or form. Disclaimer.
But you know right from wrong. So yeah, this is morally wrong. Okay, like not your employer's view. Good to know. Yeah. So much there.
But I guess I'm a semi-public figure now, so.
Okay, limited, yeah. Oh boy. But yeah, I'm just very pleasantly surprised. And part of it was I didn't fully know what to expect. And what I saw, I liked. And I hope they continue with whether it's the worst kept secret or some other curveball that we don't know of what it's, because it could be something else.
Yeah.
It could be something.
She could be a totally different character and they could bring Mephisto in. Who knows? But unlikely. But who knows?
Yeah, it's like WandaVision would have been the place for him because the souls of the kid were broken off from Mephisto's soul. Yeah. So
I mean, there's still Doctor Strange too to get Mephisto. We're gonna get him. That was the Dark World. We're gonna get him. But yeah, I think honestly nothing can be worse secret reveal than Sharon Carter being the power broker. So the bar is pretty low as to who Samantha DiMartino's character can be.
Yeah, but Carter being the power broker is inconsistent with Carter's character, right? So it's like it's an insult to the character to go, you're just wrong. And also the federal government would not do a background check on where she's been for 7 years. Or the fact that her turning over Cap and Sam's equipment was enough for her to get on the do not pardon list.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And then she gets a magical pardon. But she's still a bad guy. That's okay,
Because
U.S. government and MCU universe.
we have our moments of incompetency, but that defies imagination for it to be that bad. Your grandaunt was awesome, so you got to be okay too.
Yeah.
So no. Uh, it's like my grandpa was an aerospace engineer, so I should be good at math.
No.
You know, no, I'm my own person, so no. Uh, yeah, we'll see where they go. Whether, I mean, the reference about Nightmare and that being its own department.
Another Doctor Strange and everything is just like leading up to the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Like it's just like so many like little pieces that are falling into place. And I am just honestly, I am so excited to get three sorcerers, witches, whatever you want to call them, wizards without hats, in the MCU. I think, Doctor Strange, Wanda, and Loki. It's just gonna be good. So that's what I'm looking forward to. So every little like nugget that they drop, I'll take
So
it.
one of my other lawyer friends mentioned that one of the reasons he loves Doctor Strange is that the character learned his superpower through reading. And like that's what we do as lawyers. So it's part of the reason why the magical heroes are attractive to me is because of that. It's like, so you studied hard. Okay. Yeah, I could see why lawyers, kind of get attracted. It's not because he's got an MD. It's because lots of reading was involved. Yeah. And it's like, we know that well.
Yeah. Although my favorite is still Captain Marvel. I mean, any woman who can kind of continue to get up after being talked down to by a man, mansplained multiple times, is a hero in my book.
This is a complicated answer. I like Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. I did not like the way that they treated the original Captain Marvel because that was too complicated to do in a feminist story.
I can see that.
So, because the original Captain Marvel is one of my favorite characters, and the way that it wasn't just the gender bend that bothered me. It was they made the character disposable, and it didn't make sense for her to take that name. And it's like, no, it's like Marvel is the protector of the universe. He saved reality multiple times. Was pivotal in the war with Thanos and the Kree Skull War, and died of cancer. And the Jim Starlin graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel, is powerful and beautiful. It was also it was the first Marvel graphic novel, and it was an introduction to death for a lot of readers. And Starlin wrote it after his dad died. And the way they just kind of spit on all of that just upset me to no end, because just reference the character that, centuries ago there was Captain Marvel and he was the protector of the universe. And she can take the name because of that.
Yeah.
There was a way to do it that didn't just crap all over, the original character. And that's, yeah. So again, it's just that weird feeling of like, I liked Larson. I don't like the creative choices they made in getting there. So it's just, but she was great in Endgame. So anyway, I digress. Well, that was a lot of just nerd rage that we just had together. I'm glad we could share that with each other and all of our listeners. We'll be back with more legal analysis, or just analysis of Loki episode 2. We'll be on tomorrow night for those watching live to talk Bad Batch. And so gear up, everybody. We're now here in the summer of geekdom 2021. And so if this is what the hot vac summer is supposed to be, well, bring it on. So everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky. Thank you all, and have a great night.